How's it going? Thad Brown here with you on the Endgame. It is Thursday, May the 28th. Been a while since I've been here. I know, vacation, holidays, Sabres playoff games, all have gotten in the way of this show for the last 2.5 weeks, but don't worry, I'm back. Going to be here all through the summer. Well, most of the way through the summer, 4th of July, whatever. Got a couple solid months here before Bills camp begins, so a lot of time with me and you in this spot. Today, we're going to talk about the Bills, kind of how they're remaking the defense, literally in some cases. Also talk about the NFL schedule. Haven't had a chance to react to that being dropped a couple weeks ago. Not necessarily who the Bills are going to play week 11, but why the NFL has elected to attempt to take over Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's, and why the fans may have some say in that. And then maybe a little more on youth sports. A good article dropped today down in New Jersey about the youth sports situation in that state. I've got thoughts on where we are with youth sports with a daughter who just went all the way through the youth volleyball program, what it's like, maybe where it should be going. So we'll talk about all those things here today on the Endgame. Thanks very much for watching and listening. Like I said, let's start with the Bills, who are deep into OTA season. And look, like I said, one of the last times I was on here, do not burden yourself with anything that happens at one of these practices. Davison Igbinosun had a nice interception yesterday. It doesn't matter. This is not a time we're looking at what is the result of a practice, who played well, who didn't play well. It is so far in advance of the season. And again, there are so many things teams are experimenting on, trying out, giving people a first-time opportunity to experience something, maybe even just in an NFL setting, to get up in arms over anything positive or negative that happens in a practice. You do not care. I'm actually flipping over my X feed right now, and the first thing that came up is some Jets writer who talked about what happened at Jets OTAs. You don't care. It doesn't matter. First of all, this Bills OTA that all of us went to on Tuesday, hardly any of the starters were there. The defense didn't have Cole Bishop, didn't have C.J. Gardner-Johnson, didn't have Christian Benford, didn't have Terrell Bernard, at least on the field in team session. So these practices just don't matter to you. They matter to the team because the teams are learning stuff. Do not spend any time interrupting what looks like it's going to be about 10 days of summer this year, worried about what the Bills did during a practice in the OTAs. It doesn't matter. What has been interesting, though, and what is a little bit interesting every time this year, is to see how players come back after an offseason. What changes have been made most often physically? Who got bigger? Who got smaller? Who got faster? These are things that are semi-relevant here in May football. And for the Bills, a couple of guys who clearly have put on some weight, who have said so, I think are offering a few more clues as to what this Bills defense is going to look like. And that is the million-dollar question for this team going into the season. The head coach is new, but the offensive coordinator is the same. We pretty much know what Joe Brady is going to look like, what he's going to do with this offense. Also, most of the personnel are the same. 4 offensive linemen are back. The receivers added obviously a big piece in DJ Moore and what could be a supporting piece in Skylar Bell, but that's it. This is still Khalil Shakir, Josh Palmer if he's healthy. This is still Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. It's still the same group of running backs. So the offense, even though the leadership at the top is different, the offense is probably going to look the same. What the defense looks like is easily the most interesting part of this Bills offseason, and certainly probably the early part of the regular season, if not the entire thing. And the question was, with a new Jim Leonhard defense, how would the Bills take a scheme that was built not only for 4-3 instead of 3-4, but also built for Sean McDermott's more conservative, we're going to drop back and attack and close things off in a zone. How are the Bills going to transition into Jim Leonhard's assumed attacking style? And like I said, I think the primary changes, the things that you look at that expect to be the most different, happen up front because the Bills are going from a 4-3 to a 3-4 defense. And that doesn't just change the number of guys in the line of scrimmage. The composition and athletic abilities of the edge players are different. These are more hybrid linemen, linebackers generally. The defensive line goes from a four-man front where you have two tackles and two ends who can also be the faster, quicker, edge rushing type players to three guys in the middle who might all be giant defensive tackles. Now, the Bills won't go that way, but you can go with three bigger guys in the middle. I think the current NFL certainly leans more towards faster, leaner players with maybe one gigundous tackle in the middle to be the nose, to kind of be your space occupier at the point of attack, especially against the run. So you have all these changes, and then it doesn't even talk about the linebackers, where the off-ball guys, because there's less linemen, it's 3-4 instead of 4-3. In general, very generally, the linebackers tend to be bigger players because with less defensive linemen to occupy blocks, linebackers are going to be more likely to be fighting off offensive linemen than they would be in a 4-3. Again, this is all kind of like the 4-3 beginner class information. Teams can do a lot of different things with their defensive formations, and everybody plays a little bit of 3-4 and a little bit of 4-3 anyway. But it still is a sizable change because the base defense is significantly different than it was the year before. Not to mention that just simply going from one guy who was in charge of the defense to another is going to make this a pretty big change. So the question becomes, how do the Bills accomplish this? How do you go from what Sean McDermott had to what Jim Leonard wants to do in one offseason where you can't change out all 30 guys who are going to be on your defensive depth chart? And what we're finding out is, one of the answers is, the Bills aren't going to go out and get new bodies. Let me rephrase. The Bills aren't going to go out and get new people, but they are going to get new bodies by taking the guys they already had and having them transform their bodies into what the Bills assumably want them to be. And I think that goes primarily for two players, although I think it might be three. But Dwayne Carter has already said he's adding some weight. He came in at 305 or so. Maybe he might end up in the neighborhood of 330. And then Landon Jackson is another one who has admitted he's already put on 20 more pounds, and he wants to put on 5 or 10 more. And then the other guy I think is Deion Walker, who hasn't talked to the media yet, but looks a little slimmer, looks a little bit like he's thinned down a little bit. Remember, Deion Walker came into this league as the giant human. He pretty much got a draft pick because in college, he was so much bigger than everyone. He'd just throw people around the line of scrimmage, and that was in the SEC. So it feels like the game plan for the Bills is we can't go out and completely retool the roster. So let's take some of the guys we already have on the roster and just remake them into what fits a little bit better for us. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is good or bad. This is just the plan they're going with. The thing I will say, though, is especially for Carter and Jackson, who have already admitted they're getting a little bit bigger, I think this is going to be a lot to ask. Now, I think with Dwayne Carter, you've got a little better shot of making this work. With Dwayne Carter adding all the weight to go from 3-0 something generally to maybe 320, 330, you're looking at a guy who the Bills seem to think could be that prototypical nose, that zero tackle, the guy playing right over the center. And the Bills don't necessarily have to have a guy who does that. You don't have to put a guy right over center in your traditional old school 3-4. You can shade him, you can move him around, you can do a lot of different things with him. But this would be the typical way that you would address stopping the run on first and second down, is to just have this giant guy in the middle and have him occupy two gaps. And literally, like, just to back up and to explain football a little bit, you'll hear a lot about one gap and two gap defenses. Very generally, one gap is exactly what it sounds like. A defensive player is responsible for one gap. But in most cases, that player, if he wants to, can blow right through that gap and go make a play in the backfield. It's basically a green light to go kill somebody. Two gap, very generally, like it sounds, is you're responsible for two gaps. So if I'm the nose tackle and I got the center right in front of me, I'm responsible for this gap and this gap. But the plan more often is not to knife in and get to the backfield, but to sit there because you got to play both gaps. Like if I blow through this gap to the right, now this gap to the left is open. So I have to sit there and play both gaps. And that usually requires a bigger, thicker player who's just immovable. What's perfect for someone who's going to two gap? Somebody who's giant that you just can't push anywhere, because then he sits there and he's able to occupy both gaps. The Bills don't really have that player. If you go back to our conversation before the draft, this is why Caden McDonald from Ohio State was high on the list of many Bills fans, because he could be that guy. He could be that two-gapping nose tackle. Well, the Bills didn't take that guy, right? They took T.J. Parker and then corner, and we know what happened after that. So what it seems like the Bills want to do is maybe remake Dwayne Carter into that guy who can be your two-gapping nose tackle. And talking with Dwayne Carter, when he was at Duke, he did play a lot of different positions. He was your traditional tackle who's lined up over the guard. He played a little on the nose. He played further outside towards over the offensive tackle. So he has a variety of experience in terms of being able to play these different positions. And even though he missed all of last year, Dwayne Carter does have a season of experience in the NFL. Didn't play every game, but played 11 games. And in that time, you saw an ability to play against the run, to be a penetrator, to be a problem. So of the two guys, or three if you want to include Deion Walker, Dwayne Carter is the one who I feel the best about being able to put on this weight, take on a little bit different role than what he had under Sean McDermott, and having some success. Another thing about Dwayne Carter that you might not think about is that Dwayne Carter is on his 5th defensive coordinator in the last 6 seasons. And if you throw out last year, because he didn't play a single down last year, he's on his 5th coordinator in the last 5 seasons where he's played football. Because his last 3 years at Duke, he had defensive coordinators that were different each of those 3 seasons. Then 1 year with the Bills, it's Sean McDermott, and this year it's Jim Leonhard. So Dwayne Carter has not played in the same defensive system 2 years in a row, going back to the pandemic at this point. But I do think what we saw from him in his rookie season and the little bit of experience he's had doing different things at Duke, I think makes him a little better of a candidate to put on some weight, do something different, and be successful in the Jim Leonhard defense. Landon Jackson, I think, is a tougher one to ask. Again, with Landon Jackson, he doesn't have the 1 year of Dwayne Carter NFL experience. Dwayne Carter has done things in the NFL. Not a lot, but he's done things. He's going to walk into this season thinking, I remember when I was successful against the Eagles and made those plays. I remember when I made a couple plays against the Texans back 2 years ago. And have that level of confidence built up. Landon Jackson doesn't have any of that. Landon Jackson played 3 games last year and was a healthy scratch for all the rest before he got hurt in week 10. So Landon Jackson is still basically a rookie. Doesn't have much built up, deserved confidence when it comes to his NFL abilities. And now he's changing positions. He came into the NFL as a defensive end. He's always been an edge guy, always been a guy getting after the quarterback. And now he's moving inside a little bit. He's still listed as a defensive end, but a defensive end in a 3-4 doesn't play outside the tackle. They usually play inside the tackle. So Jackson, who primarily was an outside the tackle edge type player his entire college career, is now moving inside. Now, he did play some tackle at Arkansas. This is not totally out of the realm. In fact, I think if we're going to give Dwayne Carter credit for having some experience playing inside at Duke, you can give Landon Jackson a little bit of the same amount of credit for doing the same job at Arkansas. But it's a hell of a lot easier to move from a defensive tackle over the guard to playing a nose. Those positions are more similar than what Landon Jackson is being asked to do. Landon Jackson in college was generally your typical edge rusher. I'm going to get after the quarterback, go outside the edge, and attack that way. And now you're asking him to play more inside. He's much more akin to a defensive tackle, even if he's listed as a defensive end. The other thing that's weird, he's the only guy in the Bills roster listed at D-end. Everybody else is either an outside linebacker, and that includes the old D-ends, the Greg Rousseau type guys, or they're listed as a defensive tackle. So Ed Oliver, Dwayne Carter, TJ Sanders, all the rest of those guys. The only guy listed as a defensive end right now is Landon Jackson. This doesn't mean that they're making up a position for Jackson. I think it does show, though, that he is more uniquely situated for this defense. He's not moving right into more of a tackle role, and he's not being taken and pushed outside to play a little wider like Bradley Chubb and Greg Rousseau and Michael Hoyt will be asked to do in this defense. So that the role is unique. The change is more significant than what he's done before. And the other thing too, so he's added 20 pounds this offseason, right? And apparently wants to add 5 or 10 more. He added 40 pounds already when he was in college. This is a guy that 5-6 years ago was 220 coming out of high school. And apparently the Bills want him to play in the 290 range this year, which, although it seems like a big transition, that is an appropriate number for a guy who's going to play the position the Bills seem to want him to play at defensive end. I thought coming out of college, Jackson was a much more appropriate 4-3 end than he will be a 3-4 end. And again, those guys play further inside. Now, it depends on who you ask. I did go back and go through some college scouting takes on Landon Jackson because we really have almost no NFL film to go on with what he is now as a player. So if you go back to what he was in college, there were some people who thought he could play a 3-4 end, that he'd be good enough against the run to play early downs in that spot. I'm not as high on him in that role. I thought his best opportunity to play in the NFL was to be a power, through-your-face, pass-rushing defensive end. I didn't think he'd be that guy year one. I thought he could develop into that. Apparently, that path is no longer available because the Bills want him to be a defensive end, not an outside guy, again, with Chubb and Rousseau and those guys. I thought from the moment Jim Leonard was hired that Landon Jackson would have the toughest path towards finding a role in this defense. And the fact that they are asking him to add 30 pounds onto his frame when he's still less than a year removed from ripping an Achilles, I think is a big, big ask. And expecting Jackson to be a contributor. I mean, a guy coming off a big injury in week 10, no matter who they are. I mean, this could have been Ed Oliver, who's been in the league forever and has done a million things, made Pro Bowls, all that stuff. Asking him to be a contributor right away, even if it was the same defense, would be a lot. Instead, you've got Jackson, who didn't do the Achilles. I'm sorry, Michael Hoyt did the Achilles. Jackson did an MCL and a PCL. Keeping track of the mega leg injuries for Bills defensive linemen is not easy to do coming out of last year. But asking Jackson, who's coming off a huge knee injury in a rookie season where he barely played, a knee injury that happened in week 10, so deep into November, asking him to put on a whole bunch of weight and change the position. I mean, let's be fair. You're setting the guy up to fail. I know it's probably the best thing the Bills have for him to do in this defense because he's not quick enough, I think, to play outside. And he's not going to be big enough to play all the way inside at like a nose position. So putting him at a hybrid defensive end spot is the best thing the Bills can do. But again, think of that laundry list. He's less than, 9 months removed from a mega knee injury. He had next to no experience his rookie year, couldn't crack the lineup even when he was healthy most of the time in a scheme that better fit him. You're asking him to move inside to a spot. He played a little in college, but not nearly as much. And he's going to be in entirely different body shape after he was already a guy who put on 40 pounds in college. If I just told you that in a vacuum and said, here's this player, what do you think is going to happen? I think your answer would be he's going to fail. It's a very difficult ask. Now, give Landon Jackson credit. He's a good dude who has the right value system, and I think he's going to attack it best he can. But expecting the Bills to get much out of him this year, I think is a very, very long road to move. Now, with Deion Walker, and again, he hasn't talked to the media yet, so there hasn't been any confirmation that he's lost or gained any weight. He just looked slimmer. And separate of scheme or anything else, remember, Deion Walker came into the NFL with a number of back issues. So if there is a guy who you think would want to lose weight just in general for his personal health, it would be Deion Walker. Separate of how it'll fit into the defense or anything, if this is a guy that had trouble with his back, taking some LBs off would make some sense. Now, when you incorporate that into what we know of him as a football player, remember, again, he came into this league with, I think, the vision being he's going to be the giantest human you've ever seen, the Bills or whoever drafted him, we're going to plant him right in front of the football and say, run around this giant mountain, right? We found out that it's not who he is. He's an athlete. He can make some moves. He's got some wiggle. He can get after the quarterback. So I think if from a football point of view, if he has dropped some weight, leaning into that, making him slimmer, making him more athletic, making him more of a threat to the thing we've already seen him do pretty well, makes a lot of sense. And you can play that guy at the nose tackle if you want, especially in pass rush downs. You don't have to put him right over the center. You can shade him, put him in a gap, whatever. You can move that guy around. You can slide him out to more of a traditional tackle spot if you want to go with more 4-3 or 4-down lineman looks in some spots. You can even push him out, I think in theory, and play the defensive end position that the Bills have for Landon Jackson right now. So when we look at body transitions and how the Bills, again, are remaking the personnel by literally remaking the personnel, Dwayne Carter, I think, has a shot to make it work. I think he can fit at tackle. Landon Jackson, man, that is a tough chore, what the Bills apparently want him to do. And then Deion Walker, I think there's some excitement there. I think that a slimmer Deion Walker, if that's what it is, has the potential to develop into a really interesting force coming off the interior of the Bills' defensive line. You think about a guy like Aaron Donald, who is the pinnacle when it comes to defensive tackle play. He was a smaller guy. Now, I'm not saying that being smaller made him better, but he was such a pain in the neck. Not only was he strong, but he was really quick. And Ed Oliver is a similar way. His superpower is being quick, right? But to do that as a defensive tackle, you're usually going to be a little smaller. And that's Ed Oliver is a little bit undersized for his position, but that's okay. He makes up for whatever he's losing in size and strength with the fact that he's ridiculously fast. Well, imagine Deion Walker, who is prototypically sized to play defensive tackle, who is frankly a 99th percentile sized defensive tackle with an amount of speed and quicks that makes him even more of a pain in the neck to block. That's a fun thing to think about. And Walker in this defense, as attacking as it sounds like the Bills want to be, I think could be a real threat when you look at what he might be after a year in an NFL workout program, maybe getting slimmed down a little bit, the back gets a little healthier. I don't want to say the sky is the limit for Deion Walker. He was still a 4th-round pick. But there is a ceiling that I think can be attained with Walker, especially if he's comfortable playing a little slimmer. That, again, could be really fun when it comes to what this Bills defense could be. All right, I want to get into one other thing with the NFL here, and that is the schedule. So schedule came out a couple weeks ago. We found out the Bills are going to play games on 2 holidays. Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day. And let me start with this. As someone that covers the team, I hate it. I have to admit it. It's the worst. We all want to have our holiday time free, and all of us who work in the media are no different. That being said, it is a cool job that I do, being able to go to these Bills games, follow the team around, be someone who is talking about the game professionally on game day. So while, yes, I would prefer not to be working on Christmas and Thanksgiving Day, it's no problem. I get it. And for the last couple of years, as the Bills have avoided the holidays, we all have kind of understood that at some point, a team this popular is going to get selected to play on a holiday, on one of the holidays. We knew this was coming. So it's fine. This thought is not about me personally as a member of the media. But I do hate that the NFL is playing games on Christmas and Thanksgiving. Hate it. Especially Christmas. Look, Thanksgiving is kind of a thing that's been grandfathered in. We all understand the NFL is a part of Thanksgiving. It's a great part of the holiday. Even the third game at night, I get it. I think by 8:30, most of us are done. If you're still even awake after having all that turkey, a cool thing to do is watch football. Totally fine with that. Understand it. The Christmas stuff, and even the extraneous Christmas Eve, Thanksgiving Eve, Black Friday, it's getting excessive. Remember when the NFL used to say football is family? That was a marketing slogan they had for a while. Well, right now it's more they're saying football should replace family. Football is taking over family. Football is your new family, is what the NFL's seeming message to fans is. Because we're not just the Thanksgiving thing anymore. We're going to play on the day before Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, and more importantly, we're going to dominate your Christmas. And I've thought from the moment the NFL started going down this road that this is kind of the jerk thing to do, right? Everybody understands what football games are. It's different when the NBA playing on Christmas. NBA games, you can kind of take them or leave them, especially in December. There's only 50 or so left after that, plus a 2-month-long playoff. The game happening December 25th is not the end of the world. In football, there's only 17 games in a year. The ones in December are a little more important because they're later in the season. The NFL and everybody understands that football fans are hooked into these things like some cocaine addicts. They can't get enough. They can't pull away. And to put it on Christmas, the NFL is basically saying, yeah, we know you're going to say no to your family. We know we're going to encourage you to make decisions that are not based on what should be your priority, which is the loved ones in your life. You're going to make decisions based on your need to watch our product. And it's not just 3 hours. Especially for people who go to the games, we need time to pull in and tailgate and get through security and park and then leave. It's an entire day. Even for people watching at home, it's a giant 3-hour chunk of your day. The Bills game is at 4:30. I mean, there's no Christmas dinner with that unless you want to eat at 8 or at 2. So the NFL is certainly trampling over anything that anyone wanted to do when it came to a holiday tradition. And like I said, using our addiction to the NFL as a way to make more money and trample all over Christmas is a jerk move. But you know what? Welcome to the NFL. Because when it comes to finding an extra dollar, they have no problem making the jerk move, doing the jerk thing. It's perfect for them. Now, look, I understand that the NFL has been so successful. They have pretty much drained every source of income they possibly can find. This is why, and now they're looking for any new rock to turn over to find a couple extra dollars, searching through every couch cushion that they can possibly find or get to grab that extra little bit of change that they haven't been able to have access to before. This is why they're playing all these international games, going to these different places around the world. It's new markets to mine. And in America, Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, Black Friday, Thanksgiving Eve, if that's really a thing, these are all new American markets, new American opportunities to pull an extra couple dollars over. So I understand that. And last year, when the Chiefs and the Cowboys drew 57 million viewers, I can understand the NFL thinking, wow, we might have something here with playing on holidays. We'll ignore for a second the fact that Chiefs-Cowboys was on Thanksgiving Day, which we've already established is a traditional NFL holiday, and you took basically the two biggest brands in football, the star, the Cowboys, and the Chiefs with Taylor Swift as fan number one. Not to mention that they, at least last year, were the gold standard for NFL success. You put that all into a nice little soup, bake it all into a pie, and yeah, you're going to get 57 million viewers. You're not going to probably get that for any other matchup on any other day, but I do understand the NFL at least wanting to see. Because, yeah, I might sit here and be able to logically put together that was a one-time thing, but if you're the NFL, you might say, you know what? Let's make sure. Let's make sure that we can't replicate this. Because if we can, again, like I've said, that's another bucket of money that we can stick our hands into and put into our pockets. And I know it feels like, as a fan, that we really have no choice in this matter, right? Well, like I said, we're the addict. We're the ones that can't get away from football no matter what day it is. You want to play Wednesday, you want to play Tuesday, you want to play Sunday night, you want to play Sunday at 9:30 in the morning, you want to play on Christmas. We, the fans, can't pull away. And there's nothing we can do. The NFL is going to do whatever it wants. It's probably going to work because it's the NFL. And we are the sheep. We're just going to form a line and get herded into the pen And we're going to eat whatever slop the NFL gives us, no matter what day, what time of year, or what else we might have had planned for ourselves. And it feels like that is how it's always going to be. But the NFL fan does have some say in this. And let me offer some proof. Remember the Monday night doubleheader, right? This is something the NFL has done for darn near a decade, playing 2 games on Monday night. They used to do it just for week 1. Then it became a little more often. The NFL tried doing back-to-back games on Monday night. So you play a game at 7 and a game at 10. Then they tried playing them at the same time. Then they tried staggering the start. So you had a 7 and an 8:30. And nobody liked it. I kind of liked it. I kind of liked having 2 games on Monday night. I didn't mind. But in general, the reception to 2 games on Monday night was very negative. It was not something the media enjoyed in general. It was not something fans really took to, and the ratings reflected that. The ratings on Monday night were not great. Again, it's relative with the NFL. All their ratings are great, but relative to what they could do or what they've done in other games, Monday night doubleheaders were not very successful. People did not watch them. Do you know what's not on the NFL schedule at all this year? Monday night doubleheaders. So that does tell you that as impervious as the NFL shield appears, as untouchable as any of their decisions seem to be, if you and I don't watch and don't pay attention to these games on Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, Black Friday, whatever, they will go away. Maybe not next year, maybe not the year after. But if there is a consistent rejection, relatively, of games on Christmas Day and Christmas Eve, then they won't happen. We are not powerless in this situation. Now, it's hard to mobilize us into making any sort of concerted statement that the NFL will listen to, but the NFL listened on Monday night doubleheaders. And I know there are a lot of people out there who are like me, who are bothered by the NFL trying to take over Christmas and Christmas Eve. So if you don't like it, you have a recourse. Don't watch the games. Now, look, I understand, especially for Bills fans, how hard that can be. I feel the pull when your team is playing in an NFL game and it matters. So, like, even if you root for the Browns or whatever, you know the season's going to be terrible, but weeks 1, 2, 3, before the team is 0-55 or whatever, you feel the pull of wanting to pay attention to what's going on in that game. And for fans of teams like the Bills and Broncos, where week 16 is probably going to be a game between 2 teams very much in the playoff hunt, I understand the pull of wanting to have your eyeballs on every second of that game. But Bills fans, let's be honest. How important is that Bills-Broncos game really? Your team is one that's gone to the playoffs, 7 years in a row now? I don't even keep track anymore. It's so many times. The Bills have won playoff games. I think it's 6 consecutive years. For Bills fans, the season begins in January. This is not a regular season team. So how much do you really have to watch that Christmas Day game between the Bills and the Broncos? How much a priority is that for the Bills season? For example, remember last year? Bills, Eagles, 2 great teams, week 17, should be huge. Does anyone talk about that game as vitally important to the Bills season? Does anyone look at that game as the pivot point of where the 2025 Bills succeeded or failed? Not really. Now, look, I understand that might be a game where the Bills, in theory, could be clinching something. I think with the Patriots being as good as they are, the likelihood of the Bills clinching a division or even being clinched out of the division is pretty low in week 16, where you still have 2 more games left. Maybe they're clinching a playoff spot then, but do you really care about a playoff clinching game? Like I said, let's be fair. Getting to the playoffs is not an accomplishment for the 2026 Bills. Maybe if they're 6-7 in season, we might think it is, but sitting here right now, no. So if you missed that Broncos game, would it really be the end of the world? Is that really a game that you need to sit in and block out 3.5 hours to watch every second of. Come on, at this point in where the Bills are at, you could give that game up or give most of it up. Do whatever you want to do with your family, have dinner, keep an eye on the score on your phone, and then if you get to the fourth quarter and it's a one-score game, turn it on then. That's fine. I want to remind fans, you don't have to let the NFL own you for these games. And even if you feel like the game that involves your team, and again, I get it for a lot of Bills fans that again, the pull is strong and it is difficult to shake. I understand that. So I understand if you want to watch your team's game, but don't watch the other ones. If you want this to change, don't watch the Christmas Eve game. Don't watch the game at 1, Bears and Packers. I think it's actually maybe at noon. A game, by the way, that's going to be smack in the middle of present opening time on the West Coast. Don't watch the night game on Fox, the Seahawks-Rams game, which could be a fantastic game, but it's not really relevant to you as a Bills fan, right? You could skip that game. It doesn't mean much to your team. Not like you're going to have home field advantage or disadvantage with someone in the NFC. We already know where the Super Bowl is going to be played this year. It doesn't really matter when you play those teams in the postseason. NFL fans have the power here. If you don't like the league playing on Christmas, like I don't, if you don't want the league to feel like it has the power to take over your family traditions and the days of the year that are generally among the highest priority for moms and dads and grandma and grandpa and brothers and sisters and all that stuff, you have a say here. You don't have to watch the games. You can pull away and tell the NFL that this is not how you want things to be as a fan. That, yeah, we love your product. We enjoy what you put together. But there are some days in the year where there are other things that are more important. And even as much as we just absolutely have to have NFL football jammed into our veins for 5 months out of the year, there are a couple days where it doesn't mean as much. And if you tell the NFL that, and if you deliver that message with your remote control, with your eyeballs, it could be received. And don't get me wrong, I understand it's still an uphill mountain we're climbing with this. But the NFL does not have to be involved in every aspect of your life. It does not have to, or it should not feel like every inch of ground is a spot where it can plant its flag without fear of opposition or disagreement. The NFL is a great product. We all love it. But it doesn't have to be on Christmas. And I know there are a lot of other people who believe this. And if you do, don't watch the games. Even the Bills game. There'll be other games that matter more. You don't have to watch that game. Even from a fantasy point of view, that'll be round 2 of the fantasy playoffs. You're not winning or losing your league on Christmas Day. There's going to be more games over the weekend. Watch those games. Watch the games on the 27th and on Monday. Skip the games on Christmas. Again, I have to work it. I understand it. No big deal. It's how it goes when you have this very cool job. But for people who don't work, or even for the people who just work in the stadium who may like the job, but it's kind of a part-time thing, the ushers and the parking attendants and the security guards and the people who work concessions, I'm sure those people have a right to be pretty angered by the fact that they now have to blow up their Christmas day to work so that NFL owners can get 0.003% more revenue this year. For those people, and for you out there who don't want to have to decide between family and football on Christmas Day, remember, football, they might want you to think it's family. There is a dividing line between family and football. And if you want to keep it that way, don't watch the games. All right, I've made my point. Let's move on from that. We're going to take a break here. Coming up next, speaking of family, man, youth sports is such a cesspool's the wrong word, but it's so driven by dollars these days. And there's a new article supporting what all of us who have kids in sports know that brought up some interesting points, some numbers, some things I want to talk about. So we will hit on that next. My name is Thad Brown. This is Rochester first, the cool kids, they call it Rock One. We're back on the Endgame right after this. Thad Brown back with you on the Endgame. Want to remind you that, as always, it's Thursday here on Rochester First, and that means coming up tonight, another edition of BKO Nightly. It'll be me and Caleb Carr and Rachel Leiber. We're going to talk about Jim Leonard's defense. I hit on a little bit about how the body types are changing for some of the players. We'll talk more about how different guys, different philosophies might fit with the personnel the Bills have and where Jim Leonard might be going with his defense. Should be a fun conversation. Jim Leonard, by the way, on Tuesday this week, it was basically a press conference with, hey, Jim, can you talk about everybody on your defense? Let's ask about Igbenogany. Let's ask about Max Hairston, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Dwayne Carter, Landon Jackson, Bradley Chubb. There was a question on pretty much every single player who will prominently figure into this defense. So tonight on BKO Nightly, we will go through some of the more interesting responses, what some of the players had to say about how this Bills defense, this new Bills defense is going to look going forward, and what more of the clues we have gotten from Jim Leonard and the players this week about all those topics. All right, like I said, NJ.com. And if you don't have access to that or don't want to spend time finding it, just go to my X feed, Thad Brown 7. I did repost the article today. Did a 6-month investigation into youth sports and basically impact on it for parents in New Jersey. So for everybody listening in New York State or wherever you are, California, Oregon, Texas, Utah, whatever, this is probably not a one-to-one comparison to what's going on with youth sports in your area. But anybody who's got a kid playing sports has heard these stories before, understands what a lot of these parents are going through. And the story very smartly starts with an example of a parent, 48-year-old guy. He's got 4 college degrees. He's a teacher, coaches football. And yet to pay for his daughter's field hockey and his son's baseball stuff, he's bartending on the side to make extra money. Not only is he bartending to make extra money on nights when obviously people would go to bars, right, weekends and stuff like that, he's doing it at times when the kids he is paying for are playing in their games. Not only did the story point out that this guy is tending bar, but they said, yeah, he's doing it while he's watching his son on a streaming function playing a baseball tournament 3 states away. And this is what more and more parents, too many parents, have to do to what they feel like is keeping up with the Joneses when it comes to their kids playing sports. Among the numbers, this article pointed out, the cost of youth sports is up 46% since 2019. Now, anytime you do a number like that and you have the pandemic smack in the middle of your sample size, it's hard to totally dollar for dollar equate, ooh, that's an increase that is 100% dependent on the sport. No, I mean, the whole world changed economically in that range of years we're talking about. So grain of salt with this. But 46% is ridiculous. I mean, that means basically that if you paid $10 for something 7 years ago, that costs $15 now in the world of youth sports. I mean, gas isn't that. Gas is ridiculously high. It's not up 46%, I don't think. So that's a big number. The article says that the average American family pays $3,000 a year for youth sports. And I'd have to imagine that's the average family with kids. They're not figuring in families who don't have kids or empty nesters or whatever. $3,000 a year. In New Jersey, they spoke with a couple parents that have the eye-popping numbers. There's one parent who has a kid in swimming who pays $10,000 a year. Another parent who has a kid playing hockey pays $20,000 a year for kids' sports. I mean, that is an education at a decent college right now. And this parent is paying that so the kid can play hockey. Now, they didn't say if these kids are surefire Division I prospects or whatever. But the point is, for every one of those kids that might actually have a long-term athletic future, there's 10 or 20 or 50 who don't, who are being supported by parents who either A, feel the pressure to keep their kids up with what their kids' friends are doing, with what all the other parents are doing, or B, just don't know well enough to be able to say no. And I'll talk about how you can better address it if you're a parent with a kid in this situation in a minute. But parents are going into debt. This article talked with another parent who estimated they were 30 grand in debt. The quote from this parent was, "I hope I run into a rich uncle somewhere." So youth sports, again, to no one's surprise, I think, again, anyone who has a kid who's been involved in this understands what's happening, is becoming much more about big business than it is about the kids. There are apparently private equity firms that are behind some of these companies that are taking over fields and facilities and tournaments. Like, I guess in New Jersey, there are a couple of giant companies that are going around buying up local facilities and then pushing out the local league. You know, if you have the around the corner baseball field where the little league had always played there for 15, 20, 30 years, these companies, I'm assuming, are going in and purchasing the field so they can use it for the big tournament and forcing out whatever league or entity was there to begin with. One of the things that I thought was interesting about what this does, and not necessarily just from the point of view of the parents who are paying out the nose to keep their kids in sports, but again, this bartender, this dad who has got a second job, even though he's got a really good first job, just to keep his kids playing sports, is also a football coach. And he said back in the day, he'd go out to the middle school and watch the kids play King of the Hill, and whoever won, he'd be like, "That's my linebacker in 5 years." Kids don't do that anymore, he says. And what's being lost because of where youth sports is at, how much it costs, is what he calls the in-between kids. And I think this is real interesting because in any high school program, whether it is Rochester, New York, or New Jersey, or Texas, maybe not so much Texas, but all over the country, participation numbers, those are the things that are decreasing the most often. This is why, at least here in Section 5, 10 years ago, Calmum and Leroy was one of the biggest football rivalries you might find in New York State. And now they play on the same football team because neither school can get enough kids to play football on their own to support a team. And this is happening everywhere, every sport, except flag football for girls. Totally different discussion. Awesome to see how that has exploded. But participation is the thing that's going down. And what this bartending dad is hypothesizing is because the kids who don't pay the thousands of dollars, don't go to all the private instruction, don't play all the club teams, they're the ones that don't want to play for the varsity team anymore, or don't feel like they will be able to compete or hang or belong on those varsity teams. So those are the kids that are just not playing. And this isn't even problem number one with what we're talking about with the cost of youth sports. The number one problem with the cost of youth sports is parents getting nickel and dimed for every single dollar whatever tournament company or club director tries to bilk out of the people who are putting their kids in these programs because they think it's the only thing they have to do or the only thing they can do to keep their kids competitive. That is the problem number one. And as much as I'm sitting here and belittling the companies who are in charge of this, the big bad businessmen, right? Let's be fair. This is a country that is in many ways built on companies taking advantage of our addictions, right? Cigarettes, alcohol, online gambling. These are all things that everyone knows can be problematic, to put it generously, certainly addictive, life-altering, relationship destroying, right? Anybody would look at those three addictions and say, those can be and often are terrible things to have as a significant part of your life. And yet, all three are big business. All three continue to operate and make tons of money, sell cigarettes and beer and wine and online gambling. all the live long day. By the same token, what these big bad youth sports companies are doing are preying on parents' addiction to making things better for their kids. And no one would ever look at that in the same vein as alcoholism or gambling or smoking. Who doesn't think that doing the most, the best for your kids, isn't a great thing? If you can spare another $50 to make things better for your kid, everybody in the world would support that. But this is still something that is being taken advantage of by what has become a big business world of youth sports. And again, I think parents feel like you have to do it. This is the only choice. That if I don't spend the 10 grand like some kid and parent in New Jersey does for their kid who's in swimming, then my kid might be the odd one out. My kid might be unable to participate. My kid might be the one who gets laughed at by their friends, their teammates, even their coaches, potentially. I mean, there is some fear. Laughed at is a strong way to put it, but there are a number of high school programs, a big number, to where off-season club sport participation may not be a mandatory part of making the team, but it reaches the level of wink mandatory. And that's not just in Texas or Ohio, where football and sports like that are big business. That's right here in Rochester for swimming and volleyball and field hockey and everything else. So that is one of the major problems with how companies that finance and profit from youth sports can take advantage from parents. The other problem with this is just that parents don't have the time or the knowledge base or the time to develop the knowledge base to understand where they can say no, how to say no, how to say to your kid, you don't need this, or how to say to a coach who's saying, well, you gotta do this 12-month-a-year program. You got to do this off-season program. You got to go find this private instructor. Parents don't know when they can say no to that. So I've done some research on this myself. I talked to a bunch of college coaches over the years. The pieces of advice I always give or offer, number one, college coaches at the Division I level do not, as a priority, look for kids who play their sport 12 months out of the year. If you, as a parent, talk to any club owner or coach who says, if your kid isn't playing this sport 12 months out of the year, they're going to fall behind, those people are more likely trying to sell you something than they are putting the best interest of your kids at the top of their priority list. College coaches do not need a kid who does that. Now, look, if your kid wants to play that sport 12 months of the year, loves it so much, can't get enough, then that's fine. And the college coaches will say that. But there is no need for you to put your kid into a sport 12 months out of the year because some coach or club owner says so. And this is not me saying it. This is the Division I college coaches in Rochester and Syracuse I've talked to saying it. Number two, the most important thing for your kid when it comes to what team they play on is the coach of that team. It is not the name of the club. It is not the reputation of the club. If your kid's going to play at a club on a 16U or a 15U or whatever, who is their coach? How good is that coach? How much can that coach improve what your kid is doing from an athletic point of view? How much better can that coach make your kid in terms of that sport? That's the only thing that matters. So if you want to research, should my kid play on this team? Should my kid play in this club? Look at the coach that they would be playing for. If the answer is, I think that coach is going to help my kid, then that's where you want to go. Now, to be fair, it's not like these coaches have lengthy resumes with AI-generated experts who say, this is a great coach, this is a bad coach. We don't have Rotten Tomatoes for coaches. Maybe we should, but we don't. So it's not an easy thing to research. But if you're thinking about whether or not your kid should play in a club, the name of the club doesn't matter. The club director doesn't matter. What tournaments they play in doesn't matter. Will that coach make your kid better? That is the only thing that matters. And the other thing that a lot of these coaches will say is essentially, let your kid drag you to practice. Don't drag your kid to practice. I've talked to a number of parents. I've seen it happen. This article supports it, that the rate of kids who drop out of sports is growing. Not necessarily because of the cost of the sport specifically or anything else. There's a lot of reasons that go into it. And going back to the whole point of the in-between kids not being interested, that's a part of it. Kids are distracted by devices, that's a part of it. But kids being overworked in their sport, being forced into the 12-month out of the year stuff, that is also having a detrimental effect on how much the kid not only enjoys the sport, but gets out of the sport. So again, the advice these college coaches gave to me is essentially, don't drag your kid to practice. Let your kid drag you to practice. There are lots of ways out there to get better too. You don't have to put your kid in the youth program. Wayne Wilson, the great hockey coach, used to be over at RIT, just recently retired, talked about with hockey that you might feel like you should put your kid in a hockey club program so they can play in a tournament. Well, the kid will go to that tournament playing 4 games and maybe get 12 shots in a weekend. Whereas you could have that kid spend a tenth of the money and maybe get a private coach, do 1 hour and take 100 shots in that hour and get way better than what they would be in that tournament. So bottom line, do your research as much as you can and do not be sucked into the idea that you have to do something to keep up with the kid or the parent next to you. Every kid is different. Every way that they grow and develop in the sport is different. Understanding that as much as you can will be a help. All right, that's all we got for today. Thanks very much for joining me and watching. We'll be back again on Monday. My name is Thad Brown. This is Rochester First. The news is next right here. We'll see you on Monday.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.